Hello, this is Aaron Maller from Parallax, and this video is going to go over the additions and changes that we've made to the Parallax Millwork library for version 4.1. One of the first things that you'll notice is that the sample file has been completely rebuilt. We wanted it to be more comprehensive and to show all of the new variations, as well as a lot of the options that are present in all of the different components. So the sample file is considerably larger, and it's now broken up into groups where there is a row of cabinets showing off all of the different hardware pieces. There is a large group of cabinets showing off the base cabinet options, including the new floating options. There's a second group where there are all of the base blind corner cabinets, followed by the upper cabinets, the upper blind cabinets, the full height cabinets, and an entire new group showing all of the new and different countertop options as well. The new sample file also includes the closet rod and shelf components, and then it also has a large number of sample kitchens and kitchenettes that have been pre-built out of the pieces in this library so that you can look and see how everything goes together, and you can use those as starter kitchens and kitchenettes for your projects. So with that, we'll jump into the new features of the library itself and show you some of the changes. One of the big changes for version 4.1 is that the cabinets now have parametric controls for shelving that can show both in 3D and in elevation. If we zoom in on a cabinet, you'll see that there is a dashed line representing a shelf on this particular unit. If we select the cabinet, you'll see that there is now a parameter for do the shelves exist and what is the count of the shelves. Of course, if you uncheck does the shelf exist, you'll see that the line does go away, and also there is no longer a shelf there that you would see if you were scheduling the shelves. If you turn them back on, you can also change the number of shelves that are available. Here, because we've selected 3, there are now 3 dashed lines for the shelves. They will equally space within the feature that the shelves are present in. If you've selected a single shelf, there is also a manual control called the height of a shelf single, and that will control where that specific shelf goes only when that value is set to 1. On units that are open shelving, you will see the shelves, and of course they won't show with the dashed line because you're seeing the open shelves themselves. This has meant that some cabinet types from the library have disappeared in version 4.1. Previously, there were different cabinets in the 30s, and the difference between them was the number of shelves, but since it is now a parameter that you can type in and adjust on the 31 unit, there's no longer a need for the 32, 33, or 34 units. It's also important to note that on the cabinets that have features blocking the shelves, whether or not you see the shelving line is a separate control, as not all of our clients want to see shelving lines. They can be turned off as a subcategory, or if there is an individual shelf that you want to turn the shelving line off on, you can do that at the cabinet level. The next couple of changes that were made to the Millwork library surround the controls for the hardware on the individual features. You may remember that in the past there was a single set of dimensions for the horizontal hardware controls, and there was a single set of dimensions for the vertical hardware controls. This could sometimes be problematic, as the size of each feature may be different, but there was only a single dimension that you could use for the height of the hardware off the top of the feature, as we're showing here. So one simple change that was made is if you now look at Unit 44 as an example, and we go into the type properties, you'll see that there are now individual hardware controls for feature A, B, C, and D. The same is also true for locks if present, and all this means is that you have more granular control of the hardware in your individual units. It does mean that there are significantly more parameters on the cabinets that have multiple features, but hopefully they're pretty straightforward because they're all named the same thing, just with the addition of feature and the letter following the end of the parameter name. Similarly, there is also now a parameter for each piece of hardware that's called does that hardware exist. In the past, we simply had a parameter for is that hardware horizontal, and toggling that on or off would make it so that you either saw the horizontal or the vertical hardware. But now, because there are some features that have routed pulls for your fingers to sit in, there are times that you want to show no hardware on a particular feature. In the past, we provided a workaround in the form of having a piece of hardware that was called blank. But now you can actually just go in and simply say there's not going to be hardware on feature A or feature C. And if we do that, you'll see that those pieces of hardware will go away and we no longer need the blank hardware component. Another feature that's new for the Millwork library in version 4.1 is that all of the cabinet components now have plan swing representations as well as 3D space protection clearances on any features that are operable. For the plan swing symbol, you'll see that there are now instance parameters for do the plan swings exist, and if it is a swinging feature, what is the angle of the plan swing. Drawer features, of course, will only show the rectangular plan swing, and they don't have any parameters for controlling them. If you turn off does the plan swing exist, then of course all of the plan swings for that particular cabinet are gone, and they're gone in every view. But the plan swings and the elevation swings are all subcategorized, so you can turn them off view by view based on your presentation desires. Similarly, there is a 3D space protection clearance, which is also on its own subcategory, so that if there are views where you don't want to show them, you can have them off as well. Another new addition to the feature set of the cabinets is that there is now an independent material control for the finish that will show up on the toe kick of the cabinets. You'll see here that an independent finish was applied using the material toe kick instance parameter, and that finish is now assigned to the surface of the toe kick. It's important to note that this isn't 100% real world in that we're not actually modeling an additional material for this finish like we would if it was a real rubber base that was being applied to the cabinet. That's because using nested families won't allow us to intelligently switch between different profiles of a base component, so we're simulating it by adding an applied finish to the material of the toe kick. That way, in interior elevations, it can at least look correct. Of course, if no additional toe kick finish is applied, just like the rest of the material finish parameters in the Parallax library, the toe kick will show the same material as the rest of the cabinet. With this release of the Millwork library, there are a large number of additions of new cabinet types as well as new countertops. To start, if we go looking at the cabinet that is called Base 23, you'll see that there is also now another cabinet that is called Base 23.2. While you're looking at these two cabinets, the difference might not be evident, but the 23.2 cabinet has a style in between the two features when the doors are open. If you have the width gaps set to 0 inches, this difference may not be evident, but if we switch both of these cabinets to have a width gap of 1 inch, you'll see the difference. In Base 23, the width gap is only applied between the two upper features because they are independent drawers, but the two doors still swing to form one large opening. In Base 23.2, the two features on the top are independent, as are the two doors on the bottom, and there is a piece of the carcass in between those two doors, and you'll see it if the gaps are set to be greater than 0 inches. Even if the gaps are set to 0 and the features do touch each other when those doors swing open, there would be a style in that location. The introduction of the .2 suffix on the name follows what had previously been done for the blind cabinets, where there was a B for the suffix on the blinds. Continuing that trend, there is now a large number of units that are marked with a suffix of F for floating. You'll see here that base 21F is a floating cabinet that is almost identical to base 21, except it does not sit on the ground, and it uses the toe kick height variable to discern how high off the ground it is. It's called base 21 floating because it very closely emulates base 21, where there is one door and one drawer on that unit. All of the floating cabinets basically follow the same standard as the others, except they have the F suffix at the end. You will notice that because there are new cabinets such as the floating variants, that there are an additional number of new drafted details as well for these cabinets, since their detail does need to be different. Another new cabinet style that's been introduced in this version is what we call the X variants. An X variant is the same as its other variant, except one of the features has been replaced with a finished interior open area. You'll see here that this is considered base 21X because 21 is one feature above another, and 21X is the same thing, except the upper feature is now opened. There are also a couple of features that are now considered to have the S suffix for solid, and these are units that are finished on top for the creation of a bench or for something else to sit on top of the surface other than a countertop. There are also combinations of some of these suffixes. As an example, this is what would be called a 42X, except it's also a floating version, so this cabinet is now 42XF. Since we've introduced all of these new suffixes into the naming standard, you will find that in the user guide, they are all now listed so that users can understand what the differences are in these suffixes. There are also a number of new additions in the line of full height cabinets as well. First, you will notice that the full height cabinets also now have all of the new parametric shelving options, and specifically, there is a new full height unit 23A for appliance, where the entire top of the unit is solid with no features. This is useful if you want to have appliances being cut out of the full height unit. If your appliances are from the Parallax library, you'll know that the appliances use cuts with void and a void that's placed inside the appliance components so that you can then cut your appliances out of 23A correctly. In addition to the appliance and some additional full height units, you'll also find that there is a new wardrobe unit, and there is also a combination unit that uses a special instance parameter version of an upper cabinet to form a refrigerator enclosure. In the past, the Millwork library has had 3 countertops for straight, L-shaped, and U-shaped. In this version, we've expanded the Countertop Library to have some different features and styles of countertops as well. You'll see that there is still the original Counter 11, except Counter 11 has now had some of the angle options removed from it, and that's now in a separate standalone counter called 11A for angle. This allows us to put some additional functionality into Countertop 11. Namely, there are now what we're calling schematic design base cabinets under all of the countertops. The intent of this is so in early design, countertops can be placed in the model and then they can be made to look like there are solid cabinets beneath them for quick visualization or studies where you don't want to take the time to place individual cabinets. Later, when the project is ready for the individual cabinets to actually be placed, you can simply select all of your countertops and turn off the schematic base cabinet so that you can place the real individual cabinets. In addition, there are also now apron cabinets included in all variations of straight, L-shaped, and U-shaped. For the apron cabinets, there are options for does the apron exist at leg 1 and leg 2 as well, and we've done this using visibility parameters with join geometry so that whichever aprons are present will always appear as if they are joined to the rest of the countertop. There are also offset parameters and size parameters for the aprons so that you can choose to push them back into the location of the rest of the counter if you need to for your design. There are also now waterfall cabinets in straight and L and U-shaped as well, and the same setup applies in terms of the join geometry and the visibility parameters. If you have a waterfall leg on side 1 or side 2, they will always appear to be joined, and you can configure the countertop how you need it for your project. You'll notice on the aprons and the waterfalls that of course the schematic base cabinet is pulled back to assume that the waterfalls will be there. We understand that in some situations it may be that waterfall 1 is there and the schematic base cabinet wants to extend on the other end, but these are meant to be for very early design, and that can all be reconciled when your final cabinets are placed in the model. In addition, there are also now island-style countertops. The main difference with the island-style countertops is that you can now change the depth and the length without needing to go and duplicate types to create very deep versions of the counters. For the island style, there are also radiused and chamfered options where you can elect to have the radius on one end or both ends. Because there are so many new options for countertops in terms of when they are apron and waterfall, do the aprons and the waterfall components exist at one end or both ends, and because there are additional controls for things like the height of the waterfall legs and the thickness of the waterfall legs, the countertop schedule has gotten much more complex. Note that you still don't need to use this schedule on your project if you're dimensioning everything in elevation, but you will find that the angled ends and the existence and the size of the aprons, as well as the existence and the size of the waterfall legs, are all now present in the countertop schedule should you elect to schedule it. But it is important to note that things like the side splashes are using a parameter called the height if present. You will notice that they do report a height even if the side splash is turned off on that side, so you just need to be careful with how you're using that schedule. Another common request that we received for the Millwork library was for it to have some version of putting cornices on or above the countertops in the library. We've seen this done a number of ways over the years where you end up with a large number of visibility parameters on different pieces of cornice that are part of the cabinet families, and the trouble with this becomes, even if you succeed in making it all work, it becomes very tedious to join geometry all the pieces of the cornice. So how we've elected to do this is there is now a series of basic wall types that have the cornice sweeps embedded in them. This allows users, after they have their kitchens modeled, to take the basic wall type and draw them where they need the cornices to go, including if they want to bump out different than the profile or the base shape of the cabinets themselves. While this is separate from the cabinet components, it streamlines modeling and it makes the result much cleaner and much more real world, since the cornice can act independently from the countertops. You'll see a sample of these sitting next to the sample garden of kitchens in the sample file. Because these are system families, they're not saved in the component library, but they can be transferred or copied out of the sample project and loaded into your projects for use. As the Millwork library has been expanding, there have also been new hardware types that have been created, and you will see that there is a run of cabinets along the top of the sample file that is now showing some of the additional new hardware types. There are just some new types of bars, there are some cup-style pulls, and there are different dimensions or styles of lip pulls that go at the top or side of the features to create the type of design that you're looking for. There are also several knobs that are now included, and there are also some pulls that will appear as if they're backwards when they're on base cabinets, but that's because they're meant to be used on upper cabinets so that they are properly oriented when they're on the bottom of the cabinet. It may be handy for you to refer to this sample file because to get some of these pulls in the correct location, the hardware offset dimensions need to be set to 0 or close to 0 inches. As an example, with regular pulls on the features, we typically have the horizontal and vertical hardware dimensions somewhere between 3/4 to 4 inches. If you switch to a lip style pull, and those variables are still on 3 to 4 inches, these pulls will end up in the middle of your features, which won't look correct. Again, you can refer back to this sample file, and you can go into the type properties of any of these cabinets to see where those horizontal and vertical hardware dimensions are set to achieve the look that you want. While some of the naming can be a bit ominous, you'll also find that there are certain variations of each of the lip pulls, some that are meant to run full height on the features, others that are meant to be oriented to one end of the feature, and others still that get centered on the features. That's why there appear to be a lot of variations that look the same. Of course, as with any Parallax library, you could duplicate or save as any of those pieces of hardware to make more unique styles on your own. Another addition that's made its way into the Millwork library in this round is the closet rod and shelf component in the Parallax library. This is a generic model family with instance parameters for how long these shelves and rods are, and also whether or not rod 1, 2, and 3 or shelf 2 and 3 exist. This allows you to create different versions that have 1 to 3 rods or 1 to 3 shelves, and then they can be mitered and or joined at the corners. If we go look at the rods and shelves in plan, you'll see that they also have a detail component for simulating clothing, and you can adjust where the length of that clothing is, but also its offset from the side that it's connected to. This is intended to just make sure that closets maintain the proper depth, and you'll also see that if the angles are configured, you can terminate the lines at the end of the symbolic representation to make it look as if they are completely connected. That way, you can use this family to do rods and shelves where they are actually mitered and fastened together in a closet, or you can do rods and shelves where they are actually bypassing each other. In this particular example, you'll see that we've used two different types of the rod and shelf family. We've used one called main and one called alternate, and the alternate one has the rods at different heights off the shelves so that we can get the rods to bypass each other. In this case, they are actually dragged all the way to the end of the closet, and then join geometry is used because they are generic models, and that will clean up the shelves. In this particular case, since we wanted the rods and the shelves to miter, what's happened is, in the plan view, these have their angles set to be 45 degrees, and then they've been mitered together. These components also have a shared parameter reading the total count of shelves and the total count of rods, and there is a new tag in the library as well. It is a generic model tag for shelf and rod count, and it will concatenate the number of shelves and the number of rods based on which boxes you've had checked for 1, 2, or 3 rods. You'll see here if any one rod is removed that the count of rods will drop down. In the future, this may be expanded to have more than 3 rods and 3 shelves. This was the first option that we built, so we would love your feedback on if more rod and shelf options are necessary. While we were making this pass through the Millwork library, there were also a number of corrections and fixes that we were able to make at the same time. For starters, when this library was originally created, there were specific standardized subcategories that were created for all of the different things, such as cabinets, countertops, features, swing lines, and so on. But we did find a large number of the cabinets where the proper subcategories were not used when the cabinets were created or spun off. So we have gone back through and updated all of the subcategories in all of the subcomponents in case you're relying on subcategories for controlling any of your documentation. Another change that was made is that all of the upper cabinets have always come in with a default elevation of 0 feet 0 inches, just like the base cabinets. Originally, that was an intentional decision, but we've gotten enough feedback that we felt it was time to just change the default elevation so that they all come in at 8 feet. In the event that somebody uses Create Similar and then drops them down to 0 feet so they start coming back in at the ground level, we do still have the invisible line poking up on top so that you will be able to see them in plan and select them and raise them up. But for now, the default elevation for all of your upper cabinets when you place them in plan will be 8 feet 0 inches. Another change that was made is that the type catalogs for all of these families have always had a large number of the shared parameters in them, even though those parameters were all the same size in the type catalog. If we go to the new library and we choose to load in a cabinet, you'll see now that when the type catalog opens, we're only including the important parameters that are different in different styles in the type catalog. The width, height, depth, features, and item type tag are going to be the parameters that are inside the type catalog. All of the other values, such as the hardware offsets and things of that nature, we have corrected inside the families themselves, but we don't need to see them in the type catalog when we're loading in the components because the values were all the same. One other important change to bring up is that as we were adding in new styles to the library, we did change the way a lot of the types have been named because the system, while it appeared to be very organized, had a couple of flaws. To recap, the type names have always been based on width, height, depth, and then what we've called the style version, which typically has been capital letter A. Style version exists because there may be multiple cabinets that are 32 by 34.5 by 24, such as if one of them has flush panels and a simple pull, but others have shaker style panels and a knob instead. We want to be able to have an A, a B, a C, and a D option to encapsulate that. This came up when we were putting the sample file together because for a lot of the cabinets we started spinning off additional versions just to show you how that system can work if you start having type A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, and I all for the same cabinet. The trouble with our previous naming system was, even though we have the sizes as the primary descriptor, we were sometimes also changing the letter of the style version. As an example, we were using H for the handicap units, and we were using V for the vanity units. The difficulty or the breakdown in this taxonomy is that specifically for the handicap units, what's more important is that they had to actually be an accessible roll-under unit, and the HC variation that we were using as a style descriptor really just meant that they were at the 32.5 inch height, which meant they could be used in those applications. But that's redundant because the height value is already saying that. Similarly, the V for vanity style version that we were using was often just denoting that it was a unit that wasn't as deep, so it wasn't 24 inches, but that again is redundant already because the 24 comes first. Where that got more complicated is if we ended up with a V unit that was going to be a style A, but then we needed to have a V unit that was a style B, we started needing to have complex letter arrangements at the end of the style version, and since they're all sorted by size anyway, that wasn't providing any additional value. We just want to make you all aware of the change because now the type catalogs predominantly all start with the style version of A, and they work their way up if it's a type catalog where we are providing a number of different styles. But also, just as a note, all of these additional styles that are present in the sample file are not present in the type catalogs. This is done in the sample file just so that you can see all of the potential variations that are present in the library. And with that, we've gone over all of the additions, corrections, and changes to version 4.1 of the Parallax Millwork library. If you've accessed your download link to get the newest copy of this library, you will discover that at this point in time, this library is now available in 2021 through 2025, including the sample file. That's in 2021 and up through 2025. In the near future, we will drop off support for the 2021 version, but since we were developing this copy of the library prior to 25 shipping and then 25 came out, there is an extra version included in the library this time. Keep in mind for your users that the user guide has been updated for version 4.1 as well to go over all of the new functionality and the new taxonomy of the cabinets, so make sure that you distribute that to your users as well, so they're not lost when they're using the new library. Also, make sure to check out the sample file that has a large garden of sample kitchens and kitchenettes that are all pre-built. These can serve as baselines for model groups for loading into your units, or just as examples for how to put things together. And there are a couple of basic samples of other Parallax libraries, such as a single sink from the plumbing library and one of each appliances from our domestic appliance library as well. If those are interesting to you, there are other libraries available, so feel free to check out the website for things that we've added and new libraries that are on their way out, and let us know if you have any questions. Thanks, and hope you enjoy.